Here, what does Jesus say about righteousness? There's this play on this righteousness. We noticed earlier that Joseph was considered a righteous man. And so we get this notion of righteousness. How do we prove that Matthew is emphasizing this notion of righteousness? How do we prove that Matthew is actually highlighting this theme of righteousness, a disciple being righteous? Well, how you can do that is by comparing them with the other Gospels. Here we've got a comparison. Check this out. You're familiar with this verse, okay? Check it out in Luke. Luke chapter 12, verse 31. Luke 12:31. And here's what it says, okay? But seek first His kingdom, and these things will be added to you as well. But seek first His kingdom, and these things will be added to you. You say, boy, that's not how I remember it, because actually most of us remember that verse from back over in Matthew chapter 11, or 6, Matthew chapter 6. Okay? And notice what it says in Matthew chapter 6. But seek His kingdom and His righteousness. And do you see how Matthew adds the word His righteousness? Luke skips that and says, but seek His kingdom and these things will be added to you as well. Matthew says, but seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and these things will be given to you as well. Okay? Emphasis on the implementing of righteousness in there and stuff. Notice the linking of righteousness and the kingdom. This connection of righteousness and the kingdom. Now here's another verse. Same type of thing. Blessed are you when men hate you, when they exclude you and they insult you because of the Son of Man. Blessed are you when men hate you, when they exclude you, and it goes off like that in Luke chapter 6, verse 22. Here's Matthew, the same kind of beatitude, parallel beatitude. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness. Because of righteousness. And so you get this statement here, because of righteousness. As you can see, that's added in here. And so Matthew is emphasizing the nature, the righteousness of the disciples. Here's another one. And this one's kind of interesting because Luke is talking a lot to poor people and to helping the poor and that kind of thing. Very conscious about poor and the fatherless widow and the poor. Luke says, blessed are you who hunger now, for you will be satisfied. Blessed are you who hunger now, for you will be satisfied. Notice here it's simply talking about those who are hungry. And it looks like poor don't have food and they're hungry. Notice what Matthew does to that same verse, okay? Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. And Matthew takes it in a way and highlights the notion of righteousness then, for they will be filled, or they will be satisfied. Okay? And so you can see that Matthew repeatedly emphasizes this nature of righteousness then. Okay? So how do you account for these differences? Matthew's trying to develop a theme. Jesus Christ's disciples need to be righteous. Joseph, his father, was a righteous man. Jesus' disciples need to hunger and thirst after righteousness. Okay? Now, Jesus goes after a deeper righteousness, however. And Jesus moves it from the head to the heart. And so you've got these kind of statements coming from Jesus. You have heard it said, don't commit adultery. Now everybody says, well, I never committed adultery. I've never been married, so I couldn't commit adultery. I've never been divorced. You've heard it said, don't commit adultery. But I say unto you, whoever looks on a woman has committed adultery already with her in his heart. So adultery now, the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not covet, thou shalt not lie, thou shalt not do any murder, thou shalt not commit adultery. One of the 10 Commandments. Christ says, anyone who's looked on a woman lustfully has committed adultery already in his heart. Which means then, that is everybody in this room an adulterer? Having looked on a woman with lust in her heart. Okay? All the guys at least, okay? So, this is a big thing. So Jesus is taking the law and driving it into the heart. Similarly, he says down below that, You have heard it said of old time, do not commit murder. But I tell you, anyone who is angry at his brother without a cause has committed murder in his heart. Because anger is at the root of so much murder. And Jesus says you've got to get down to it, into the heart, what it is. It isn't necessarily just always what you do. It's what you think. It's who you are. And so anger is the seat of murder. Now, by the way, is Jesus saying all anger is wrong? No, God in the Old Testament gets angry. Okay, Jesus in the New Testament gets angry. Jesus in the book of Revelation gets angry. Okay, all anger is not wrong. He says, be angry, I think it's in Paul, be angry and sin not. Okay, but anger can lead toward murder. Okay, and so he says, you've committed anger in your heart. Once upon a time, I used to, for actually over a decade, I taught in a maximum security prison in Indiana State Prison in Michigan City. I used to teach down at Grace College, and then I'd go to college teaching and teach, and then I would get in my car at night, and I'd run up to Michigan City. It's about an hour and a half trip up there, and then I'd teach for 3 hours up there at night, and then travel back half asleep and come back from there. But people always said, how do you relate to these guys in the prison? And the answer is, the reason why I can relate to guys in the prison is because, you say, these guys are all in the big house, okay? This is maximum security prison, okay? 40-foot walls, 10-foot thick and stuff. The prison was built, I think it was in 1865, so it was really old and decrepit. And these huge walls and things like that. How can I could relate to them? Is because why? Jesus said, if you've been angry at your brother in your heart, you've committed murder already. So yeah, I've got friends in this prison who were murderers. And you say, well, how do you relate to a murderer? Because I am that. I've never really killed somebody on the outside, but on the inside, I've committed that crime as well. Committing adultery. Some of these men were in for rape and stuff. I've looked on a woman lustfully and things like that. So when I go into the prison, are those guys so much different than I am? And the answer is no, they're my brothers. Because I understand the roots of what they did is in me too. And that's Jesus. Jesus is the only reason why I'm on the outside. And so what I'm saying is that when you understand Jesus is driving the notion of sin into the heart, so that everyone is guilty, so that Jesus, what? Jesus is going to save them. What is the main mission of Jesus? What does his name mean? Jehovah saves. Saves from what? Saves them. His name is Jesus because he will save his people from their sins. He will save their people from their sins. That's what Jesus does. He's come to die for the sins of the people. Okay, and that's the main point of Christ. And I know sometimes in modern culture it seems now that we're shifting the message of the gospel over to the message of the gospel is helping the poor. The social gospel, the social justice issues. And we make a big deal out of the social justice issues. And I'm wondering whether we're missing the point that Jesus came to save people from their sins. And now we're telling them people that the gospel is a social justice issue. And I'm thinking, no, Jesus came to save the people from their sins. We need to understand that first. And that needs to be a major focus for us. But there's been a subtle shift in our culture over the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And now it's, even what I just said, some people would find very, very offensive because I'm going back to what? Jesus' original calling. That he shall save his people from their sins. And that means that you have to understand that people are sinners. And we say, oh, no, we don't want to think about people like that. But that's the way Jesus, that's his name, Jesus. So, okay. And basically, in Matthew chapter 12, verse 36, Jesus says basically, we're going to be accountable at Judgment Day for every word that comes out of our mouth. That's pretty strong language. So Jesus says he wants a better righteousness out of his disciples. His righteousness has to come from the heart. Not just knowing what's right, but there has to be in the heart what's right, down to the point of no lust and anger and those types of things. Now, a better righteousness in terms of the mouth to the hands, okay? Do not do what they do. Do what they tell you to do. Do what they say with their mouth, but you do it. In other words, your hands have to be involved in the work of God. Not just do what they say, but they don't do what they say. You guys need to do what the word is. So for righteousness. A core righteousness. What is the core righteousness that Matthew develops? Love God. Matthew chapter 22. what are the two great commandments? What are the two great commandments? They asked Jesus, what is summarize your teaching, the Old Testament teaching? What is the major teaching here? And basically it is to love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and to love your neighbor as yourself. Those are the two things that the law and the prophets, the whole Old Testament hangs on those things. And Jesus as well. Love God, all your heart, soul, and mind. Love your neighbor as yourself. The core righteousness that drives a person is what? It's not, I'm better than anybody else. It's the love of God and the love of one's neighbor. Is love hard? Is it easier to hate or is it easier to love? It's easy to hate. It's hard to love. One of the most difficult things you'll do ever in your life is to love another human being. Loving is hard. And Jesus says those, loving God, loving others, those two things, major things. Now, he's going to talk about the disciples and their understanding, but I think we'll pick that up next time, and we'll go through the disciples in terms of their understanding, the disciples in terms of true and false disciples and how we sort that out. And so we'll finish up our talk about discipleship next time in the book of Matthew. So thank you for your attention, and have a great day. This is Dr. Ted Hildebrandt in his New Testament History, Literature, and Theology course, lecture number 6, on the beginning features of the book of Matthew.